Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, we'll begin with introductions.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Scott Doolin and I am a second year master's student, just about to finish this program inshallah ta'ala, and I am local to the Bay Area here.
Assalamu alaikum everybody. My name is Jawad Qureshi. I am a professor in the MA program here, and I am also the administrative director for the MA. I teach classes on logic, theology, and research methods. I'm from Chicago, and I've just moved to the Bay to teach here for the past 2 years. Alhamdulillah.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sarah, and I'm in the first year of the master's program. I'm originally from Toronto, but I moved to America, and I've recently moved to the Bay Area to do the program.
Thank you. We had the pleasure of having many perspectives today. We have Scott and Sarah, who are students, and we have Dr. Jawad Qureshi, a member of our faculty. So you may ask questions directed to both our students or our faculty. So my first question to any of our panelists is to please describe our master's curriculum.
Well, I'll take the lead on this one. So the MA curriculum is focused on studying Arabic, studying the primary texts of the Islamic tradition in 2 tracks. One track is the philosophy and theology track, and then the second is the Islamic law. And as a core for all of our studies, we have a number of courses that are shared by both. So students study Arabic, grammar, they study logic, they study adab al-bahth al-munadara, dialectic, and ilm al-wada', as well as balagha, just rhetoric. These are core that are shared by both tracks, and then each track has its own courses that are specific to it. So the philosophy theology track, for example, they study texts in falsafa and then texts in kalam. And in the law track, students study furu' and as well as usul and as well as qawaid. So they study substantive law, legal theory, and then legal maxims in addition to that. The primary method of instruction is through reading texts in the original language, and with the emphasis on depth of understanding those texts.
Thank you. Which tracks are you two on, Scott and Sarah?
I'm in the philosophy and theology track.
I'm also in the philosophy and theology track.
Great. And Scott and Sarah, why did you choose to come to the Zaytuna Master's Program?
So I think the most important thing for me was to see a real life application of the tradition. So it's easy to find institutions maybe where you have a very narrow focus on just naql, where you're just sort of taking from the tradition and reading the texts that have been read for a long time, but you're not really seeing the application of that to modern issues. And there isn't an opportunity to research modern issues and to deal with that. So the research was really important for me, and also seeing application.
So I'm a graduate of the 4-year program here at Zaytuna College. So I went through the undergraduate, and by the grace of God, they opened up this master's program the year after I graduated. So for me, it was a logical progression to come here. Beyond that, my ultimate goal is professorship within the field of Islamic studies, and I knew very confidently that this would be the best institution for me in order to progress along that path towards professorship in Islamic studies and to be able to do higher level research in the fields from a dual perspective, both within the tradition and without the tradition. By without the tradition, I mean from the Western academic tradition as well as within the Islamic tradition. And this is a unique program that would allow me to engage in that task and to facilitate that ultimate goal.
Thank you. So Dr. Jawad, I know you've been a pioneer of the program and helped to design it, and previously you had experience in Western academia. How are we different from other options which students have in Western academia?
That's a good question. I think what makes our program a little different is that our focus is to have students read these texts and master them directly, and we treat the subject matter that we're looking at on its own terms. So in other words, we don't do, when we study Islamic law here, or theology or philosophy, or any of these tracks that we have, we don't study them as the history of. So they're not survey classes where we do a broad, narrative of, the development of Islamic theology from the prophetic period and through the, the different schisms that happen and the formations of orthodoxies and heresy. We don't just do this broad survey. We actually train students in knowing these texts. So the texts that we study were there as pedagogical texts that were meant to initiate the student into that field and to give them, a grounding in that discipline. And so we emphasize that aspect of the study of Islamic disciplines. And we don't sacrifice the breadth, though. We also maintain that, but that's not our priority. So we do historical elements of it too. Of course, you simply have to. But our priority is to train students in becoming, initiating them into becoming people of fiqh, people of falsafa, tawheed, and these other disciplines. At the same time, though, we realize where we're situated. We're Americans. We're here in the Bay Area. We're in Berkeley, and we're all speaking English. And there's a way in which scholarship is done in America, and in the West generally, and that we're trying to meet those standards while also being true to the standards of the tradition as it is. And so as Sarah was mentioning, we have this emphasis on the research element of it. So the capstone of our program is that students write research, MA thesis that's considered an original piece of research that will be a contribution to the field. And for us, we define the field by the Anglosphere, so the English-speaking is Islamic studies, which would incorporate elements of the academy, but is not limited to the academy. So if you think about the Anglosphere, the English-speaking world, it's not just the academy. You also have places in South Asia, and you have other places where scholarship is happening in English that we're in conversation with as well.
Thank you. So we have a question from our online audience, which is to please tell us more about the philosophy aspect of our philosophy theology track. Let's see, either of our students can answer that.
I can start. To be honest, coming here, this was one of the things that I heard a lot of criticism regarding, was that, why are we studying philosophy when there are philosophies out there, but the ones that we're maybe dealing with are in class are not as relevant today as they were when these texts were first written. And by these texts, I mean the theological texts. So there's two aspects to that. The first thing is that I think actually after having, and I decided this after like 2 weeks of starting philosophy class, it's impossible to understand the theological texts that we study traditionally without knowing the philosophical background that the authors were dealing with at that time. Like, you can understand it on a very superficial level, but you won't really get to the meat of, why they're talking about issues in a particular way, what the language that they're using, without understanding that background. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that philosophy, like every other science, is something that develops over time. And so the philosophical problems that we're facing today are built off of those. It's not like they came out of a vacuum, and it's completely irrelevant. So that's in terms of the relevance and the importance, I think, of studying philosophy. And then in terms of what we actually study, so there's a lot of focus on metaphysics, and it's Aristotelian philosophy that we really go into. In the second semester onwards, we're also dealing with like the Illuminationist schools, Transcendentalist schools of philosophy from the Muslim world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Scott, I know we've talked about your thesis, which you're writing, and you're a second year student. Perhaps you can share a bit about what your thesis is on, because it's on philosophy.
Sure. The first important factor that I think should be clear in the way that we engage with these texts is that we start with the assumption that no matter what time period this author was living in and what context they were working with, they have something to offer us today. That they're engaging with the world, they're engaging with their tradition, they're engaging with universal and atemporal, ahistorical, philosophical questions that are still relevant for us today. Something that we can pull from, something that we can utilize in order to help us grapple with the problems and the various situations that we find ourselves in. And so, for example, in my thesis, I'm writing about Ibn Sina, and I'm writing about his development of what historically became known as the transcendental concepts. Concepts such as the one, unity, or the good. These very abstract concepts that sort of they frame the way we think about everything else we do. So, for example, we often say that something is good, something is good, something is good, like water is good, education is a good, politics can be a good, or a particular political position can be a good. But what Ibn Sina is asking is, what does this mean when we say X is good, Y is good, Z is good? And so he gets deep into these sorts of questions. Now, this is very relevant for us today because we still might not have a clear articulation or clear definition of what it means when we say that such a decision is good, or water is good, or whatever it may be is good, right? And so he gives us material that we can utilize then to help us, work with these problems, or really, so I guess what I'm trying to say is the philosophical tradition is not dead. It's still alive. It's something that we can utilize. That's something that I'm trying to do with my thesis, is grapple with questions that are still alive, that are still pertinent to our day, but without necessarily taking them out of their context. And so it's something I feel is important. And that's something that is unique to this school. Like Dr. Jawad said, we don't study these just as historical texts, that they're actually something that there's a fruit that we can still eat the fruit.
Yeah, I would just add to Sarah and Scott's really good answers that, part of the reason why philosophy is a core part of this curriculum is that it was in the classical curriculum too. You couldn't do the higher level usul and even kalam texts without really having at least some training in the philosophical background behind these, whether it was through logic or through some of the questions of metaphysics. You had to have that rooting. You had to be rooted in those disciplines. One, just to give a very real example that I experience a lot, is as a student when I was studying overseas, I would want, there's one of the key texts that we teach, and it's part of the Islamic theological curriculum throughout the Muslim world, is Sharh al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya. Most people, in order to really appreciate the masail that are the questions that are discussed in that book, you need to have some logic and philosophical background in order to tackle that. In places where they've jettisoned logic and philosophy, when it comes to Sharh al-Aqaid, it doesn't make any sense. It's an impossible text to really study. And when I had studied this overseas, the teachers that I was studying with, they didn't have that logic and philosophical background, and so the text didn't make any sense to them. And it was a unique experience for me here, having to teach it then. And my students, Scott and another student, they had logic and philosophy, and so the difficult problems that everyone complains about when they study Sharh al-Aqaid were not a problem for them because they already understood them, right, from previous courses. So the point is that the reason why we have philosophy here is because the tradition has philosophy in it, right? The higher kalam and usul texts are engaging philosophical questions, engaging philosophical problems. They have their own take on them, but it doesn't make sense unless you know who the interlocutor is. Right?
Thank you. We have a question from our online audience about the theology track, and the question is, do we tackle modern issues such as atheism and postmodernism in the discussions and coursework?
So I think that we give the foundations for that problem to be tackled, right? So in other words, again, you can do a class where you're taking hot button topics. I can do 13-week semester, first week atheism, second week postmodernism, and just hit all these hot button topics, but you don't walk out with the tools of learning for that discipline. You just have a lot of talking points, and you have a broad understanding of what the problems are, but you aren't trained to actually give those answers. So what we're actually doing is trying to train students in those fields so that they can give those answers. If that's what they want to pursue for their research, great. We know that we've given them the core tools for that to explore those problems, and that they can do that. So we don't, set up our lectures in that way. For us, it's the topics of the discipline itself. Maybe I should pull back a little bit here and say, how do we approach knowledge at Zaytuna? That might help set the tone for our listeners. Fundamentally, each discipline that we study in the Islamic tradition, we look at the ta'rif of it, the mawdu' of it, and then the ghaya, the definition of the discipline, its subject matter, and then the purpose that it serves. Normally, we call these the mabadi' al-ashra, the 10 starting points that somebody should know to study every discipline. And other places call it the ru'us al-thamaniya, right, the 8 heads. But the 3 core ones that we're looking at as a definition, the subject matter, and the purpose of it. So once we have a definition of a discipline, I understand what theology does, I understand what logic does, etc., etc. You have a tasawwur am of it, a general conception of it. You can look at the subject matter. And all the Islamic disciplines are distinguished on their subject matter. And then we look at the ghaya, the purpose of it. What does this help us do? And so, for example, the ghaya of ilm al-kalam, of theology, is part of it is ithbat al-aqa'id al-diniyya, right? Is establishing the foundational principles of theological principles of religion, right? And so we give the students the tools for that. So we're not, and then the next level, so we have those 3, and then some scholars add the masail. What are the talking points? What are the problematics of that discipline? And here's where somebody could say, well, I think new atheism, we need to spend a lot of time on this. I think we need to spend a lot of time on evolution. I think we need to spend a lot of time on postmodernity and these other things. But you can't tackle those problems unless you have the mabadi', unless you have your starting points, unless you're rooted in it. So the texts that our authors have compiled for us are meant to do exactly that. They give the student the definition, the conception of the problem, the definition, the subject matter, the objective of the discipline, and then the masail, right? Those are the 4 things they get it, and they give them now the ability to tackle those problems. So if a student were to say, for example, look, I'm really interested in researching the challenges of, how does postmodernity or post-structuralism or any of these other, ideas that are reignant in the world today, how do they affect Islam? Are they a challenge? Can we benefit from them somehow? How do we engage? At what level? Well, you can't do that unless you have a rooting in the tradition itself. So if a student asks, hey, I want to look into that, we would encourage that, because we know that we've given them the mabadi', the fundamental starting points for those disciplines. And here, the first question you ask about what the difference between Zaytuna and another program is that in another program, you don't get that foundations. They say, yeah, that's a great topic, go into it. And so how are they going to answer? More often than not, what happens is that they'll adopt some other theorist and just apply that to Islam, right? And so that also gets to the distinction between Zaytuna's program and somewhere else. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm receiving many questions about the application process, so we'll hold off on those, but we will get to those in a minute. Before we get to those questions, I want to cover the backgrounds of our students here in terms of what type of students are successful in our program. So where are your classmates from, Sarah and Scott? And what are their backgrounds?
Well, I have one main classmate because there's only 2 of us in the second year philosophy theology track. And his background is he's actually been in Islamic studies for his entire life. So his background, he's been studying Arabic for a very long time. I don't know too much, so I don't want to speak too much on his behalf, but I know that he was in a really strong program in Texas where they went through these similar texts. So he is a great foundations for this particular program, and I've seen him really shine. So, but that's the madrasa background, I would say. Maybe a unique madrasa background, but I think you can see the clear benefits that particular background holds for someone like himself. And now he's able to ask certain questions that he might not have gained at that point in his life, that these might be questions that have dawned on him as he's engaged both with the Muslim intellectual heritage and the Western intellectual heritage, and the way he frames these questions is incredibly unique and incredibly beneficial, I think, for our society. So it's very good. Yeah.
And your background is from Zaytuna College. How did Zaytuna College equip you for the master's program?
Yeah, I mean, studying the liberal arts it helps us ask the right questions, I think. It helps us know which questions should be asked when we're engaging with these traditions. So we're not just repeating questions that maybe have been answered appropriately, so that we're actually moving knowledge forward, which I think is one of our main intentions, inshallah.
Thank you. And Sarah, I know you went to a conventional college. So if you can please share more about your previous training and then what trained you to come to Zaytuna's master's program?
Sure. So I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts from Toronto, University of Toronto, a while back. And after that, I studied Islam privately, both in Toronto and then abroad in Morocco. And I think that from the university perspective, that trained me in terms of reading and research and having the right approach to just the academic side of classes, how to prepare for exams and that sort of thing. That's a really strong part of the program here, and it's really important. And then the Islamic studies, obviously, having Arabic is critical. You can't do the program without that. And then also how to study text in like a matan format and the way that they would traditionally do. Do you still want to know about the other classmates and stuff? So we have a couple of people that graduated from the Zaytuna program, and I think, as was mentioned, the focus on logic and the tools of learning is really important for people coming into this program. I think it was probably a lot easier for them to transition into the text that we're doing here. They do the same subjects, but at a much deeper level in terms of Arabic and logic, and then rhetoric in the second year. And the students that have come from other backgrounds, there's another student also who came from Qalam specifically. So I know that she has had a lot of exposure to many different texts and the same sciences, and so now she's getting a chance to go more in depth, and she's really appreciating that. The opportunity to sort of, now you know broadly what the tradition is, and now you're going more in depth with certain texts. And doing research also. And we have a student who has been sort of working in the community, and she's actually an Arabic teacher. She's also really appreciating the opportunity to do research, and is really looking for an opportunity to give back in that way, not just to sort of learn, but to be able to actually produce something that's beneficial for the community. And then we do have, as I mentioned, the students who are from Zaytuna.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from our online audience about writing. So the type of writing that we do in the program, and how the program prepares you to write in a particular field. Particularly, Dr. Jawad, you can take that in terms of how do we train our students in writing.
So we have a series of different types of writing exercises that we give our students. I mean, one layer of writing of the assessments that we do is in translation. So translation is a form of writing in a sense, right? Because you're taking a text in Arabic and you're saying, I can convey the meaning of the author accurately in a second language. And so and the voice of the translator usually comes through quite a bit in their word choices and their phrasing of sentences and so on and so forth. So accurate translation is one of the key things that we look at. The second is different genres of academic writing. So we have them do research papers. We train them in doing like book reviews, profiles, and then even just surveys of texts. So how does a text work? So they'll take, for example, a very large work and write kind of for lack of a better term, a book review. Actually, that is the right term there. They write like a review of it. So in other words, a 5-volume work on theology. We can't read the whole thing because we just don't have the time, and it's just most people tend not to read these bigger books cover to cover in that way. But you want to get the students an ability to you want to take that fear of these big books away from them a bit. And so one assignment that I give students is to say, all right, we're going to spend a few weeks as part of your assignment to spend time with this book, see the larger architecture of it. How is it organized? the macrostructure of the text, the microstructure of the text. So what's the tabweeb of the book, the organizational structure of it? Getting into a particular bab, then how does the author reason within, right? And that type of assignment, what it does is it familiarizes the student with a large text, gets them over the stare of it. But in the end, they produce, 10, 12-page summary of this that for them they can refer back to, and it could be of use to other people who are, interested. They might be interested in the field. That I don't know what these types of books are, but I have some kind of guide towards them. The capstone for us, again, like I mentioned, is the MA thesis, and here it's an original problem that the student is investigating, and in conversation with the existing literature on the language, and making an original contribution. So, for example, and here this is the more of the engagement with the academic side. So, for example, since they're here, Scott's work, for example, on the transcendentals, it's taken him into the field of Avicenna studies, which is very rich in the Western tradition, one of the richest in terms of the Islamic studies subfields. And he's worked on his German. He's engaging German scholarship as well, and so he's fully immersed in that type of problematic and the scholarship related to it. And I believe he's writing a real contribution, to that literature as well. So that's the type of writings that we have students do. We emphasize that, so that's in terms of writing, but there's another element to our program as well, which we call it the informal talk. So students in the MA have to deliver in their last semester, in the last year here, what they call an informal talk. The idea of the informal talk is, all the other writing that we're doing is so focused. It's focused on scholarship, on research, and, writing to a very limited audience. The informal talk requires a student to step back and to say, now we're speaking to a general public, right? How are you going to talk about your ideas to them? So it forces the students to say, okay, let's answer the so what of my research problem, right? And how do I speak to a broader audience about this? And how do I show them the value of the work that I've been doing? So we don't require it as a writing sample, but more of a presentation.
Thank you. So one thing that excites me a lot about our master's program are our excellent faculty. So it would be helpful to share a bit more about who our faculty are and their backgrounds. So potentially we can start with Scott in terms of who are you working with and what are their backgrounds in terms of your faculty.
Yeah, well, we're incredibly blessed in that regard. Our faculty here, a set of amazing individuals. I'll share some thoughts about Sheikh Marshouk Yemech, who is a faculty member. He teaches, right now he's teaching the philosophy course for myself. He also teaches some of the tool sciences, such as he does the Arabic grammar, he teaches dialectics, as well as the science of Arabic semantics, or philosophy of language, or al-wada'. And he is a absolute master of this tradition. He studied in Eastern Turkey, in Kurdistan, spent his entire life studying the Islamic sciences, has memorized probably most of the books in this library, and is just a walking embodiment of the tradition. But he's also someone who's deeply engaged in the contemporary world and the problems of the contemporary world. So he's really an excellent help and an excellent guide in bringing this tradition to life and situating it within our context here. And really an incredibly humble individual as well. Yeah, mashallah.
So I'll take the embarrassing job of talking about Sheikh Jawad with Sheikh Jawad here. Dr. Jawad is amazing. We've told him many times that it's impossible to walk out of one of his classes and not understand whatever it is that he's presenting. Mashallah, he's a really skilled teacher, and also I think particularly unique in that he's studied the tradition from, like in Syria, and from within the tradition, and then also done the Western academic thing. So he's, mashallah, a true doctor. And I think that the thing that you get from this program, particularly in terms of the faculty, is just accessibility, and also because it's a fairly small program and they deliberately keep it that way, you really get into the material and ask questions in a way that we don't get. Like I have experience in another university program, obviously, but from a much larger school. It's a completely different experience. I also took classes at a master's level there, although I was in the undergraduate program, and you just don't get that kind of interaction at other schools. So.
Thank you.
So I would just add that Sheikh Mashouk is also the director of studies here. So the curriculum that we're studying has been curated by Sheikh Mashouk, and to fit the time frame, the needs of the program, and to get to the core problem. So we're getting like the distilled knowledge, of a number of his own personal decades of studying, but then also this larger tradition. In addition to Sheikh Mashouk and myself, we also have Dr. Fadi Al-Hain, who was the Arabic coordinator for Zaytuna, and he still is the Arabic coordinator for the BA program, and he is also a specialist in Islamic law, and he teaches our courses in the Islamic law track. So he teaches the text and mu'amalat, as well as usul al-fiqh, as well as legal maxims, so legal theory and legal maxims as well. And Dr. Fadi's been, mashallah, part of the Zaytuna family for a long time. And the students all have a very close relationship with him. And then also we just added this year Sheikh Talal Al-Ahdab. Sheikh Talal comes from Lebanon, and he's been in Canada for a good few decades now, and he's been teaching in Canada for a long time. His own training comes from ulama of different backgrounds from Lebanon as well as the Near East. And he's mashallah alayhi, he's a master of the aqliyat as well as the naqliyat as well, and it's a real blessing to have somebody like Sheikh Talal teaching here. In Canada, he was kind of this tulab al-ilm that we're studying knew Sheikh Talal, and we were all benefited from our small durus with him. But the benefit of a college like Zaytuna is that we free up the faculty so that they teach, so they don't so that they're not. Their time isn't taken up with other commitments, and they can actually teach, and we can complete books. So a lot of the one distinction between having a 2-year MA program and kind of traditional study is that with traditional study, you're at the mercy of the schedule of the teacher. If the teacher's family is busy with something and he can't come to the class and the dars is gone, you meet once a week for 1 hour, it's over, right? Because they have other commitments in their lives. But here at the program, we can say within these 13 weeks, so for example, just to give our first semester, in the first semester, you'll finish Sharh al-Kharida, you'll finish Mughni al-Tullab on the Isa Ghoji, you'll finish Idhar al-Asrar in grammar, and then you'll do, in the law track, you'll do mu'amalat, half of Quduri and mu'amalat, and then you'll also do, what's the text I'm missing here?
Hidayat al-Hikmah.
Hidayat al-Hikmah in Falsafa. You'll cover them, you'll complete them, you'll actually finish them. When I was looking at one of my books the other day, it's a tradition of Tulab al-Ilm that they mark off where they finished their dars. So I finished this dars this week on this date. Then you go to the next dars, you finish this dars on this date. I was looking at one of my books, and it took me 2 years to finish one metin. 2 years overseas, whereas here we're finishing it in 13 weeks, and that's one on top of the other classes. Right? So having the teachers free to teach it's really a unique setup.
Thank you. So, of course, our students who are considering graduate studies want to come to Zaytuna, and they have goals of doing things after Zaytuna.
Right.
So my question is multifaceted. One is, what are you two considering doing after Zaytuna? And also, Dr. Jawad, what are you hoping our students are prepared to do after Zaytuna?
So maybe I can take that first and let you guys answer them. So the purpose of the MA program is not necessarily, it really is tailored to the need, not tailored, but one of the first questions I ask students when they come, what are your post-Zaytuna plans? And in fact, in the interview, when we interview students who are applying, I ask them, what are your post-Zaytuna plans? And, we get a range of answers. The ones that we are interested in at the college are people that are interested in ilm, right? So if somebody wants to set up, some kind of community program or whatever, that's not what Zaytuna really trains people for. What we're trying to get people are interested in ilm. So after Zaytuna, if they say, I want to continue studying, in more depth under the ulama, ahlan wa sahlan, that's a great, we can help you, set you up for that. If you say that we're interested in pursuing higher Islamic studies in the West, so a PhD program, for example, ahlan wa sahlan, great. That's we can help you with that. And then, so those are the types of students we're looking for. That's what we're trying to push them towards. So as it is, the program by itself, the core ulum that we cover, set students up well for advanced studies with the ulama, if they want to continue that way, or in another program, or a ma'had shari or something like that. In terms of the Western Islamic studies, some students have expressed interest in that, and we have set up, a number of things to help them toward that end. So, for example, basically there's mentorship and guidance that, we provide so that they are on top of their applications and everything else, making sure they have the recommendation letters and, all that type of thing that we need there. Alhamdulillah, shukrillah, students have applied for higher Islamic studies. We have students who've applied for law schools as well. And alhamdulillah, they're receiving very positive answers so far. So we're very excited about that. But then others who are not interested in Western Islamic studies and simply want to continue with either community work or with ilm in another capacity, we feel they're totally situated to do that. The idea is that it's not, if at the BA and at the MA as well, if we can produce a professional class that is rooted in Islamic knowledge, that is a major plus for the Ummah as a whole, particularly the American Muslim community. Right? Because you imagine, the lawyers, medical doctors, and other people that are rooted in the Islamic tradition, like really rooted in it, that'd be wonderful, right? And then, of course, there's going to be those who have the capacity and the interest to carry on, professional kind of Islamic studies in an academic setting or ilmi setting as well.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm praying, inshallah, to be a lifetime academic and to make a smooth transition from studentship to professorship. I am one of these recently applied individuals that Dr. Jawad was talking about, and I will share an anecdote. I was recently in a U.S. city, a major U.S. city, at a major U.S. institution, speaking to the professor, and I believe he's the director of the Islamic Studies department in their theological school. And he mentioned right at the outset that Zaytuna College is the best institution for preparing someone for this type of studies. If you want to do Islamic studies in a Western academic setting, he said it's the best. He said, hands down, it's the best. And throughout my interview, one thing, forgive me for sharing an anecdote here, but throughout my interview, one thing that I came to realize is that he was surprised that I was very familiar with the terminology. So what happened is he gave me a text and he said, read this. And he gave me no context or anything. And I read it. It was an Arabic text and I read it. And what he was surprised was not just that I could read the Arabic, but that I understood the terminology. I understood the problem that the author was dealing with. I understood the context the author was coming from. And that couldn't do that without Zaytuna. So really, it is preparing us for hitting the ground running when it comes to the academic environment in a way that I think other schools are lacking in that sense. So I'm getting that.
Just want to share that I met Scott 6 years ago when he was starting just the basics of his Arabic journey. Sort of what is Alif Ba Ta. So to hear that is very fulfilling. Alhamdulillah.
So I hope to continue my studies and also to go into writing afterwards. And I think what Sheikh Jawad mentioned about the various elements to choosing an applicant basically reflects what the students are actually looking to do after the program. So
great, thank you. So inshallah, so in the final moments of our online open house, feel free to keep sending me questions. I want to go into some of the more nuts and bolts about the program. So of course, graduate studies is typically a very expensive endeavor. How does Zaytuna's financial aid policies help you study as a graduate student here?
I wouldn't have been able to do this program without financial aid, and I think that's probably true for most people. It's extremely generous, and I think there's a misconception because people see the tuition costs and they just assume that that means that everyone is paying that out of pocket, but actually the college is very keen to make sure that students are graduating without debt. Because it's an Islamic college, it's rooted in those principles of making sure that knowledge is accessible for people and that, people are not taking out exorbitant amounts of debt in order to just have access to education. So on top of that, there's very affordable living. I know for the undergraduate and actually some of the graduate students who are not married live, in the dormitories here, and they're beautiful. I think the women just got a new kitchen. It's amazing. I mean, really, mashallah. I don't think that there's anything like it. And I think there's an article I read that came out a couple of years ago that actually named Zaytuna as the most affordable college in the country. So that says a lot.
Yeah, I also wouldn't have been able to do this without the incredibly generous financial aid and just the immense amount of support that we receive, both financially, spiritually, and just from all angles. We get so much support here in order to engage ourselves in this work and to utilize this time and to be freed from. So I do have, a part-time job that I'm doing during this time, but it's also sort of an extension of what I do here because I'm teaching. But really, we're allowed to be freed from certain constraints that might take us away from the work that we're doing, which I'll just say as an aside, historically, really the great movers and shakers of history were often people whose educations were funded, and they were given that time to really delve into the acquisition of knowledge and the acquisition of principles so that they could then bring something to their context, bring something to the world. And these are really, if you look at the great individuals throughout history, this is very common. So it shouldn't be seen like, oh, they're not really working. They're just in school, and this is work, and it's incredibly important for the health of a society to have a space in which people can do this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about the the funding for the program is that the underlying philosophy behind it is that there has to be, that in order for this to happen, the life of the mind, the life of the spirit, there has to be a degree of leisure time. Leisure time not in the sense that I'm just going to lounge around and watch TV or something like that. Right? Leisure time really in the sense that it's time in which you're freed to pursue that which you were meant to pursue, right? So everybody works, we all have our kind of 9 to 5s, everybody wants to do that. But when do you have time for your religious life, for the life of the mind? So the point of the MA program is to, and even the BA is to say that we're going to provide this leisure time, right, in the real sense of the word, for our students so that they can cultivate the mind and cultivate their spirits. And so the program from the beginning has always emphasized being very generous to the students in terms of freeing them up from that. So students don't have to worry about working a second job, third job to try and make ends meet, or to go, even worse, to go into debt. Alhamdulillah, our students graduate debt-free. So they can finish a BA, they can finish an MA debt-free without owing anything. It's very difficult in America today. It's very, very difficult for that to happen. And so, the emphasis is that students are freed to focus on their studies, and the college takes the burden of a lot of that.
And I would just add to that also that in that spirit of freeing up students to focus on their studies, there are also regular meals offered on campus. Like, I've just never seen something like this before. I don't think it exists. Like, I'm not just saying that. I really don't think that it exists elsewhere. They have dinner and lunch a few times a week. Recently, they put little snack bars, on the campus because they were worried the students were studying too hard and not getting enough food. So, I mean, it's amazing. Like, the community really cares about, and the college itself really cares about the success of students. So,
it's a school the school's not looking to make money; it's looking to make complete human beings.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. So, we have a question from the online audience about the rigor of our program. So Dr. Jawad spoke about having leisure time. So how do you use that time?
There's a lot of reading. It is a rigorous program. There's no, but it's very rewarding. And I think that the spirit of the college here, I mean, I've seen students come in from the undergraduate program just this last semester, and they're reflecting on the fact that they just can't believe how much they're getting done just because of the motivation that they're finding in other students and in their teachers to really use their time to study hard. And that's the undergraduate program. I think that's also true for the master's program. Just speaking from personal experience and also talking to the other classmates, they definitely feel like, it's amazing. Just like Dr. Jawad was mentioning, how much we cover in a semester is incredible. That's not, you have to put in a lot of work, obviously, to do that, but it's very rewarding. And in terms of leisure time, I would say you just really have to do a lot of review and a lot of reading. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think I have goals, that there's a reason I'm here, that I'm sort of directed towards, we would say, a final cause, professorship, or some type of career that will come out of this. But ultimately, I do this because of love. And I think ultimately, the student that we're looking for is a student who's doing this work out of love. And so you're asking about workload and this sort of thing. For me, there's no differentiation really, other than going outside and enjoying the beautiful world around us. There's not much differentiation between work and off work time or reading. When I read for pleasure, I'm reading the same thing I would be reading in school. And so it all sort of blends together. And so it's a rigorous program. We love to write, we love to read, we love to engage with this text, and if that's something that speaks to you, this is the place for you. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So I think that the typical day of the students is busy between their classes, their reading, and then there's this peer learning as well that we have, where students pair off and they do their review for the text together. And we have communal things as well. Like Sarah mentioned, we have dinners and that type of stuff. We have a lecture series on campus as well that also is part of this feeding the life of the mind as well. So the life of the student is it's a lot of it. A lot of the mundane aspects of life are kind of taken care of for us, and they're allowed that space to really grow, right, and mentally and spiritually as well. We don't. The college, it's a Muslim space, and so we make times for communal prayers for Salat and Jama'ah. For during the day, we have that's set up in both campuses, the upper campus and the lower campus, and we do try to cultivate a communal sense that we're all learning together as well, right? So the idea is that not just that I'm in my silo studying on my own, but we learn together, not just teacher-student, but also peer learning. And that when we go out to mix with other students, that they're all kind of involved in learning in some way.
Thank you. So now, inshallah, I'd like to move on to the application process. And I'll just answer a few general questions right now. So you can find out our application online. Just go to zaytuna.edu/admissions, and our link is quite prominent there for the application. It's an online application, and there is a application fee, but if we are also very open to waiving that fee for you if that would be helpful. So for our students who have applied, what advice do you have for future applicants?
I don't like this saying normally, but just do it. just start the application. A lot of people hesitate because they're not sure that this is the best program for them, that they're going to get the financial aid that they need. I had a lot of questions before just starting the application process, and I wish I'd done it sooner. So I would say just start the application process, and the admissions team is very, very responsive. If you have questions, if you need help with anything, Dr. Jawad, I think, was actually personally answering my questions when I was applying. So that would be my sincerest advice, is to just trust and do it. Yeah.
And feel free to reach out. We're busy, but we're all responsive, and there's a whole track of the program that's not represented here, the law track. And so if you have any questions, please reach out to Faithful, and he'll direct you to one of us or to whoever may be most appropriate for answering that question. But please, if you have questions, don't hold them in.
Right, and you can reach out to me directly by emailing me at admissions@zaytuna.edu. Dr. Jawad, how can somebody improve their application, or what can they do to present a strong application?
So the things that we really look for in an applicant are number one is their ability in Arabic. If they have an upper intermediate level of Arabic, because of the fact that all of our classes are done through accessing the primary texts in Arabic. And some of our faculty actually teach in Arabic. So they have to have a good command of Arabic. That's really one of the most important elements of their application. Secondly, there has to be kind of we don't do a personality test, but there has to be a personality that's interested in knowledge and in intellectual problems. So that is reflected in their writing sample. The writing sample, if it's not many people have the opportunity to write papers related to ILMI problems, but if they if they, for example, have a BA in something else, and they submit a paper that they wrote for another subject, for example, history or sociology, or it might be, the writing sample, even if they submit something like that, tells me how their mind works a little bit. So if they can present the strongest writing sample that they have, that will be of benefit for them as well. And then we do an interview which we conduct over Skype or on the phone, and we give the student a passage to read, and if they prepare that well, then they usually do quite well. I mean, so our first bar really is the Arabic language, and then the kind of a personality in terms of how do they have an ILMI background or ILMI concerns. And then the last I would say is do they have some training already, right? Do they have some training in the Ulum Shara'i generally? We're not expecting someone to have finished a madrasa. We're not expecting somebody to have, completed a whole program. We're expecting somebody to have at least the mabadi, the starting points. They've studied something in fiqh, they've studied something in tawheed, they know their tajweed, they know their fard ayn, that kind of thing. But they want to take it they want to do it in a more formalized manner, and that it's really rooted in the primary texts.
Great. So we have some specific questions about the application. So one is, do we have a GPA requirement?
Well, the better the GPA, the better the application, of course. There isn't a clear, a cutoff. But we also understand that there's people's situations change. I mean, alhamdulillah wa shukrullah that we aren't going off of my undergraduate GPA, which was quite bad because I was, kind of not clear about what I wanted to study. So I took classes in all kinds of places and, lost interest. And so my GPA suffered horribly. But it wasn't until I got to graduate school, that I knew what I wanted to do. And so my GPA from then on was quite good. So we understand that there's things like that happen, right? So if the strength of somebody, if the other aspects of somebody's application are strong, then that could perhaps be overcome, a weak GPA.
Great. And what about timing? So we have rolling admissions. What does that mean for our application, for applicants who are trying to time when to apply?
I would follow Sarah's advice completely and say, if you're interested in doing this in the fall, apply right away. Start the application, be in communication with the admissions team, telling them, just get the process going. Start speaking with your recommendation writers of recommendations, letters of recommendation. Start gathering that material and just start the process sooner than later. We don't have a cutoff in terms of number of students yet, but there are other considerations in terms of space and logistics. So get in before things kind of get filled up.
Great. And I can address a question that I'm seeing from the online chat. It's about international students. So for the MA program, we don't currently accept international students, but we are working to do so in the near future. So please check our website for updates on that item. So inshallah, we are... Okay, so we have a bit more time, inshallah. So we have a question about from the online audience about their undergraduate thesis being acceptable for their writing sample.
Yeah, that'd be an excellent example of a writing sample, because it's the culmination of your BA work, and so we'd like to see that. That would be excellent.
Great, great. And then previously, just going back to some previous questions, one viewer asked about, how much flexibility does a student have in choosing their thesis topics?
It really, the thesis topic comes from, it's going to stem from a conversation that you have with whoever you want to be your thesis advisor. And so there's a lot of flexibility. And if it really comes down to your relationship with your advisor, and if the advisor says, that's something I can help you with, let's go, then you're good to go. Right. So the process of deciding on the thesis is the student comes up with, a ballpark sense of their idea. They have to formulate a thesis proposal in their second semester. We have a class that will train people to do that. Look into secondary literature, generate an annotated bibliography of material, formulate a question, think of the possible implications and the originality of the contribution that they're making. So there's a whole process we have that we guide students through for formulating their thesis. But primarily the choice of it comes from the student and their advisor.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have myself, for example, in this class that we have graduating, I'm working on this work with Ibn Sina. It has some major philosophical questions. We have someone who's looking at questions that relate to the relationship between law and theology in terms of what is good and what is wrong in actions. We have someone who's doing economic questions and looking at economic problems. We have someone who's looking at maqasid al-sharia, so he's looking at the aims of the law and sort of giving an analysis of that particular field. So we have quite a bit of diversity that is being developed and being cultivated within our student body. And I'll just say from my own experience, it's been a little bit of a journey. It's been a little bit of an exploration. And in terms of, I had one idea and then that idea shifted over time, and now my idea shifted to something almost quite different than my original idea, which is okay. But that throughout the entire experience, that journey was facilitated. And so I never felt like there was something rigid that I had to stick, okay, you have to produce something that's like this or something within this sort of these defined limits. There's a lot of flexibility in that sense.
And Dr. Jawad, would you say that the thesis has to be within the two tracks, though? Like it has to be it has to fit within either the law track or the philosophy theology track?
Yeah, but I think between law and philosophy theology, you pretty much have everything covered. Yeah. So, it will be within those tracks. But the main thing is that if we have, if you can find an advisor which whom you can work with and want to generate an idea that that you can get guidance on, and somebody that could really help you make sure that you're writing something that speaks to a real problem that they can help you research. Right. So our emphasis is primarily on philosophy, theology, and law, and so we don't tend to do things related to the social sciences. That's not what our purview is. Other places can do that, and then students who want to do something like that can pursue those types of degrees there. But ours is considered really, we're looking at philosophical and theological problems, legal problems, and so on. So Scott gave like a good overview of some of the masail that our students are researching. So fiqh al-aqaliyat and maqasid al-sharia, right? Minority Muslim law and the objectives of the law. We have a student doing that. We have the nature of Ash'ari ethics is a consequentialist, is a divine command, right? Philosophical notions of the transcendentals, the good, the beautiful, the true, right? The problem of what's the illah for riba, right? How has that changed in the 20th century, and how have ulama and different thinkers shaped that discussion related to Islamic finance? And then the problem of slavery, right? The ethical moral problem of slavery. So you see, there's quite diverse. Right, it's quite diverse. But the thing is that the reason why they're able to accommodate all those concerns is because there are faculty members that can speak to those.
So last two questions, inshallah. My first question comes from a member of our online audience, which is about American students who have madrasa backgrounds from abroad, but not traditional college backgrounds. Do they have a place in our program potentially?
That's one of those things that we're still negotiating in terms of how to value that. So they seem to have a student like that would have the requisite skill set in terms of the Arabic and the ability to access the mutun, but if they don't have degrees or paper, so if they graduated from the madrasa and they can say I have my alamiya, for example, from Pakistan or someplace, then we can treat that as a BA, and then they can come into the MA. But if it's just like, I've just done traditional study, meaning I just sat with the shuyukh and not finished a program, I don't have any kind of documentation of that, that's a little trickier for us.
Okay, so in this case, this viewer is asking about having a Dars Nizami sort of certificate of sorts. So that would be equivalent to a BA.
Yeah, we would have to measure it. It's like a alamiya, depending on the type of what they actually finished. And there's some equivalency that we could probably give for that. But
Right.
that's the type of thing we have to look at a more case-by-case basis.
Sure. My last question is about the Zaytuna College master's program being situated at Zaytuna College. So Zaytuna obviously has a BA program with many faculty members, and it's our 10th year. How does the master's program being situated in the broader college impact your studies?
I really appreciate having just an environment of learning around me, because it's also just not Zaytuna College. We're located in a really unique place where there are a lot of schools of divinity and similar things around us. And there are huge libraries like within walking distance from the campus. So it just really supports the student experience, I think, to have that environment around you.
Great. All right, inshallah.
Well, maybe I could just add to that thing, amplifying something that Sarah mentioned, is that we're located at our graduate program is located at Holy Hill, so we're surrounded by the Graduate Theological Union and other theological programs around in Berkeley. And so we have relationships that are developing with them. We have a class that's being, that was in the process being taught with the Dominican School of Philosophy and Theology, which inshallah will be taught in the fall. So there's cross, pollination benefit. We're actually benefiting from the other programs there. Students have access to the Graduate Theological Union's library, which is across the street from our program. 2 blocks from my office, at least, is the University of California, Berkeley, and their library, which is one of the best state libraries in the country, particularly their Islam collection for Arabic texts, for Persian texts, for Urdu texts. Alhamdulillah, we have good relations with the Middle East librarian, the South Asia librarian. And so in terms of just being here, we have a lot of things that support, like Sarah mentioned, the student learning. And then our relation to the BA program is that, alhamdulillah, we have faculty that go from the BA that also teach in the MA or that support the MA. So, for example, we had Sheikh Faraz Khan, who normally teaches in the BA. He took on a class last semester to teach fiqh. Sheikh Abdullah Ali, Dr. Sheikh Abdullah Ali is, he normally teaches in the BA, but he's working as a reader for students on their MA theses. So he's working on, I think 2 students have him as the readers on their MA thesis. So there is benefit from not just the BA program of Zaytuna, but then the college, the theological schools around us, and then University of California, Berkeley. So alhamdulillah, it's a really rich educational environment that students will get to have.
Brilliant. Well, firstly, thank you to our panelists. I thank you for sharing your experiences, and thank you all for joining us. It was a pleasure to host you at Zaytuna College. For those of you who joined a bit later, inshallah, the recordings will be available, so you'll have access to the entire discussion. Just a reminder that applications are open, so please log on to our website to find our application, and please contact the admissions team if you have any questions. With that, inshallah, we will see you shortly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair.